Welcome back to the Nebraskabilities podcast. I am your host, Andy, joined by my co-hosts, Nate and Zach, here to discuss with you Nebraska's latest pitfall. They fall 26-9 to Illinois last Saturday at home in what was only to be described as a very, very bad and ugly football showing from the Cornhuskers squad. We knew going in that Illinois was a very stout team on both sides of the ball. They proved why they were number one leading the Big Ten West. And going forward, who knows what will happen with Illinois. They still have to play Purdue in a couple weeks for probably the Big Ten title West Division race, at least. But in terms of what happened on the field Saturday, it is pretty hard to describe anything other than just a very bad, ugly football game from the Cornhusker squad. Some of the biggest, notable news that came out of the game is obviously Casey getting hurt in the second quarter, and his kind of future for the Minnesota game and the rest of the season, and what that means for Nebraska. And we'll get to that later in the show. Mickey did discuss that today of Casey's status, so we'll get to that later. But in terms of how the game went, first quarter, pretty decent showing from Nebraska. Offense got going on a couple big plays, got them some points. Defense forced some 3-and-outs, made some big plays, stepped up when they needed to, and then the Casey injury kind of just was the turning point for the entire game. We could go back and hypothetically say, if Ramir catches that pass that he dropped, does Casey even get put in that position to get hurt a couple plays later? But that's neither here nor there. Point of the matter is, Casey did take a shot, did come out of the game clutching his right hand, couldn't close it from what it showed on the TV. So hit a nerve in that elbow that caused him to be out the rest of the game. And showed us what our backup quarterbacks could do, which was absolutely nothing whatsoever. We're gonna have a discussion on that later on what that means going forward for Nebraska if Casey is out the rest of the season, if we do have to rely on Chuba and Logan. But we'll get into that. But I'll pass it to Nate for just some initial early thoughts on the game.
Yeah, it was kind of tale of two halves, I guess you could say, where first half we at least looked competent and could move the ball a little bit, had a few defensive stops here and there, but then that second half really just took the wind out of the sails, and we ended up falling 26-9. Wasn't really particularly close. I mean, we had that, I think it was 6-9 at one point in the second quarter, but then Illinois started running away with it pretty well after that. And so I don't know. I didn't see a whole lot of necessarily positive moving into that or looking at that game. Casey, for what he did play, was all right. Before he got injured, still had the one interception. Probably wasn't necessarily that second one where he got injured. Probably wasn't necessarily on him, but he had the earlier interception that wasn't necessarily the prettiest ball that I've ever seen. So, but other than that, defense at least held up a little bit. Whether only gave up 26 points, which isn't necessarily the worst, but if you're only scoring 9 points, it doesn't really matter too much. So
I was gonna say that score shows just like it doesn't look that bad on paper, but if you watched any part of that game, you know that Illinois 100% could have scored more if they wanted to.
yeah, it easily could have been a 40 to 50 point game to our 9 points just as easily. So kudos to Brett Bielema for letting his foot off the gas a little bit. We appreciate that. Not getting completely boat raced, but still not a great showing. Yeah, I guess I don't have too much more to say. I'll pass it over to Zach on some of his initial thoughts right now.
Initial thoughts for me about the Husker game comes from the Mad Men episode where Pete Campbell is walking to the walking to the elevator, and he walks in, and his coworker says, "How are you?" And he looks at him just dead in the face and goes, "Not great, Bob." That's about the best way I can put it, because not great, Bob, is how the game went on Saturday.
Yep.
And I know I was talking to you guys because I had to go and work at a couple things on Saturday in the second half, so I didn't get to watch the second half until later, which turns out I think was kind of a blessing in disguise not watching it live. But
You're one
I
of the
do
lucky
remember
ones.
I do remember pulling my phone out and just checking my like 34 text messages from these guys and just getting the minute to minute updates basically, and a lot of it didn't read very well. It was not good, and so then having to go back and rewatch the second half was really hard to do. But at least I knew what to expect. Um, but yeah, it's going to be tough to see, or not tough to see, but it's going to be hard going forward. I think if Casey is not, ready to go, at least I don't know his status. I think remains day to day, which we'll touch on later, I guess. But the fact that he's only day to day right now, and we're going to play Minnesota, doesn't necessarily strike confidence in me. And I know even last week I was chugging on the Mickey Kool-Aid saying, hey, I think he can rally the troops and get things done. But I think there's a lot of work that needs done that even the best head coaches would have a lot on their plate if they came here to try and do the same thing. But who knows? I'll be curious to see with the rest of the year if I'm still on the same Mickey train. I might be putting my foot out now just to test the waters of other coaches and see. But we'll see where that goes. But I will pass it back to Andy to get us into the actual game.
Yeah, so starting with kind of the first quarter really looked kind of promising for the offense, at least. I mean, you come out on first series, Anthony Grant has a couple good plays. Caught that swing pass for about probably like 15-ish yards or so. Had a couple good runs, and you kind of got the feeling like, oh, if Nebraska can kind of keep this up and push this Illinois offense around, there's a chance that they can kind of stay in this game and keep going. And I think that we had kind of talked about before is, as much as you don't want to get into a shootout kind of game, I thought that was also Nebraska's best chance to kind of push the ball against Illinois, is as we saw that Illinois just kind of the second half, just kind of ground and pound, run out the clock with the nation's leading back, which you should do, and which they did. I did kind of think that, if Nebraska were to kind of stay alive, you're going to need a couple of those big Trey Palmer plays, a couple of those big, just passing big explosive plays to kind of get you in position to score. And we did see that, the chance like that tight end screen was like nothing I've ever seen before. That just was a really good, well executed play where Brewington caught it, got us down, settled for a field goal out of it. Cause I think after that, we kind of ran 3 straight passing plays or some sort of combination of that, which then you settle for a field goal. Which I thought, well, if you're going to beat, the best team in the Big Ten West, you can't win on field goals. So kind of disappointed we settled for a field goal with that. But then they come out either the next drive or a couple drives later, and Volkolek with it almost looked like it could have been picked off. I thought at first Casey underthrew it, but Travis kind of made a great adjustment and ran it the rest of the way. And I just don't know if he's not very fast, because he kind of looked gassed at about the 20-yard line running towards the end zone at that point. And I go, oh, maybe that ankle's kind of still holding them up a little bit. But Nebraska got on the board with that touchdown. What ensued after that, and what we'll save for later, because I know Zach has a couple good talking points, is the blocked extra point that happened right after that. And it's very laughable, and I'll save that for Zach when he gets to it, because I know he has things to say. But they showed a graphic on the TV, kind of like either at the somewhere in the second quarter, of like how much Illinois' offense had given up during the entire season, or what they had given up today. And the offense had about 215 yards and 9 points scored at that point, which is the most that Illinois kind of had averaged all season. So I'm like, man, you keep this up, you have a chance to win, because you kind of already have beaten of what Illinois holds teams to during the season. And then obviously the second half happened, and that's a whole other discussion that we'll get to. But like I said, you can stick on hypotheticals, that Ramir drop. Man, if he catches that and makes a move, I mean, you probably score because he had nobody in front of him on that play. But then, alas, the most devastating thing, which I know that we had all talked about every week, essentially, is one of these shots Casey was going to take was eventually going to sideline him for a longer period of time, and we did see that. Illinois got through on a free blitz. Casey just kind of lobbed it up. Hopefully that somebody would make the catch. Obviously, he threw it as he got hit because it was a floating duck for Illinois to pick it off. But as we saw, just not a good scene. Casey just kind of sitting there on the ground holding his arm because he couldn't close his hand. And as we found out later that he had a nerve in that elbow. Uh, like you said, Zach, thankfully so far all we've heard is day to day. So it's good for kind of a long-term scene of, Casey being available. But if I were to bet for this week against Minnesota, I'm going to guess he's not going to play. I think unless he has some sort of miraculous turnaround in the next 2 to 3 days, I'm going to bet that he's probably not going to play against Minnesota. But, we knew at some point that, the O-line was going to eventually, quote unquote, kill Casey in one of those hits that he took, and it did happen. It's just not a fun scene for anybody to watch, and it definitely shows why our offensive line deserves the Fire into the Sun award every week. And at first, I thought the first quarter happened. I'm like, maybe they don't deserve it this week because they were kind of pushing Illinois around on the the defensive line. And then everything after that, and I was like, okay, no, they deserve every single bit of this type award. But outside of that, I mean, first half, it just was not good because Illinois scores on the next interception, next drive, and then they score right before half, go up 20-9 at half. And at that point, you just kind of thought, like, man, if Les Casey's available for the second half, you got to stick with Logan or Chuba. Things were not going to go well for the offense, and they didn't. But with that, I'll kind of talk or I'll pass that to Nate. You can talk about the second half, or we can get into the whole Chuba versus Logan debate because that is something that we will have to address going forward.
Yeah, so I guess just looking, I mean, first half was what it was, and ultimately is defined by Casey getting injured. I mean, we were at least on a track to, if nothing else, keep up with Illinois a little bit until that Casey Thompson injury, and then, like I mentioned, the rails just kind of, or the wind just kind of got knocked out of the sails there, and so we got a look at Chuba Purdy and a small look at Logan Smothers.
3 plays almost.
Unfortunately. Yep. So that's, like you mentioned, going to be an interesting talking point going forward is what direction do we want to go? Because Chuba certainly did not look the part of a Division One starting quarterback from the snaps that we saw, and I'm sure a lot of that has to do with our offensive line and Chuba not being used to being chased around 2 seconds after the ball being snapped. But unfortunately, that's going to be the reality that he's going to have to deal with, and that's kind of the hand that he's dealt. So how he adjusts to that will be interesting to see. It'll be really, I guess, eye-opening because I believe in Mickey's presser, he was saying that Chuba was taking most of the first team snaps. Did I hear that right?
They had equal reps at least
Okay.
today and yesterday with the first team.
Okay. So that at least opens up the possibility of potentially seeing some Logan Smothers mixed in there as well. And if it were me, I think that's probably the best approach, I feel like, is
I would
try
agree.
and mix it up with each of the quarterbacks, keep the defenses on their heels. It's not because neither of them are going to be as certain of a player as Casey was, as good of a pass thrower as Casey was. And so being able to mix it up and throw Chubb in there when you know you want your certain passing plays, but put Logan in there for more of a wildcat play, but even maybe mix it up with a few passes in between too, just keep defenses on their
Right.
heels, I think could be.
And I think I agree. I think that's what they have to preach to Logan this week, because we know Logan is the running quarterback, but you do not want to put him in there and defenses just play the run because they're like, oh yeah, this
Mhm.
quarterback's in. He's like, we know they're gonna run some sort of read option. So if they're gonna put Logan in there, you got to put packages in there for like a read option pass where he hits like Vokalek over the middle, or Palmer on a slant, those type of plays. Because if you like say, hey, this is our passing quarterback with Chuba, this is our running back quarterback with Logan, defenses will play to that. And obviously, how we saw Chuba Saturday, I don't think defenses are going to have to worry about passing too much with Chuba so far.
Yeah. No, unless he makes some monumental strides over the next few days here, I think teams aren't going to be too worried about Chuba's passing abilities necessarily. But it at least gives teams a different look, which could potentially help us, I suppose. And so, like you mentioned, just being, I guess, persistent. I don't know if that's the right word, but kind of knowing what we want to do with each quarterback and what set plays we kind of want to run with them will be important moving forward. And so, uh, I guess that's kind of the story of the second half for me, is just really understanding how we can move forward without Casey. Because even Anthony Grant, they were able to stop him because they knew we couldn't throw the ball. Going to be an issue if you can't get the ball downfield and open up your running game that way. So,
My favorite stat
I
of the second half was the offense amassed the whole 29 total yards.
yep.
That is astoundingly good that you can do that bad.
Yep. Granted, they were playing a very good defense in Illinois. I will give Illinois the credit there. But to not Illinois' credit, they were playing probably one of the worst offensive teams that they could have at that point. So
it would, what I always think about of like backup quarterback situations, I always go back to Alabama of having Jalen and Tua as your 1 and 2, who are two starting NFL quarterbacks out. I'm like, do you know how nice it would be to have a backup quarterback that is also an NFL starting caliber type quarterback just at your
Yep.
disposal?
Yep. We'd take just an NFL starting
I
quarterback.
know. Yeah, you're right. Whether he's the starter or not.
Any sort of prospect would be good right now, but no, that's about most of my thoughts. I guess the only other sad thought I had was Trey Palmer, only 1 reception for 1 yard after his monster performance against Purdue. Again, that's going to be tied more to Casey and anything else, but was kind of unfortunate to see that he had a less than stellar game. So,
I mean,
but I'll pass it over to Zach with his thoughts on the offense.
Not much more to add beyond what you guys already said. It just wasn't great. I mean, the weird thing to me is that we can always see hopes and glimpses here and there. You'll see one good play or 2 good plays, or I mean, heck, we put together a really good drive and went to, I think it was 93 yards for that touchdown that Vokalek had. And I mean, that Vokalek touchdown, first of all, was great to see him get another touchdown, but also I thought was funny because I just remember watching him run down the sideline. I'm like, he looks exhausted. Just like he got to the 20-yard line, I think. Maybe it might have been closer. And I was just like, he better like boot it into second gear because I don't know if he's going to make it. Luckily, he did.
I did not think he was going to make it. I'm like, man, I could always just picture the back of my mind of like a defender just slowly creeping up. I'm like, oh, is he going to make it or not?
And that was a perfect example of just, it was like, if he would have been half a second slower, he probably wouldn't have made the touchdown there. But still, up until that point, even though Illinois, I think, had scored the touchdown first, or maybe they had 2 field goals. I don't quite remember. But anyway.
Yeah, they scored because they missed their extra point.
That's right. Okay, so even though Illinois scored first, I didn't feel like the momentum had been lost. And then we scored the touchdown, and I was like, okay, Now the momentum is back, and even on TV, you could just hear the stadium rocking, which then led to the missed extra point. Which that's future that I'm mad about that for different reasons, but that goes into a slightly different discussion, which we'll get to later. But it it was so rough because usually in the last few games that we've watched, it's been a tale of two halves with Nebraska. This one's been a tale of one quarter, and the rest of the game just didn't. And you could tell too, like once Ramir dropped that pass, on top of a few other plays here and there, that just on top of questionable play calling, this game just looked off in general. And I mean, I know we haven't looked like a top NCAA football team for a long time. I understand that, but there you could see some changes that even when things kind of went off the rails, that Nebraska didn't truly give up in the last few games. But it just, as soon as Casey went down and as soon as that pass was dropped, I guess in the reverse order of that, but as soon as Ramir dropped that pass, which would have been a heck of a gain had he caught it. If not, I don't remember if he would have been gone, but he looked like he would have gotten close at least, because he had quite a bit of space down the field. Um, Casey probably wouldn't have gotten hurt, and we probably could have, made a run for at least a field goal, if not a touchdown. And you just kind of see at that point the wheels just fell off, and it was downhill from there. And it's also really concerning to me that Nebraska has Casey Thompson as their starting quarterback, and that's good. Like he's been okay, but then our backup quarterbacks have not developed hardly at all, it looks like. I think, Logan's obviously got the legs to run, but like you guys said, as soon as you stick Logan out there, the assumption is it's going to be a run or, at most maybe an RPO, but it's like whatever. And then Chuba, he, I don't know if it's because he has dirt on like Mark Whipple or something, but I don't know. I was convinced that maybe the game wasn't lost, but there definitely should have been a bit more back and forth and see, who can perform better under the pressure. But I don't know. I don't, obviously I can't speak about it because I don't know what it's like to coach and I don't know what goes on the sidelines. So it's tough because I think they both probably have intangibles that work really well on the field, but you didn't see it. And so it's really tough to watch an offense that can't seem to just get out of their own way sometimes, even in the face of adversity. Yes, Casey going down wasn't great. Yes, Ramir dropping that pass wasn't great. But, how many times do we hear Scott Frost say, or other coaches even say, that games are won off of one or two plays? Well, that was our one or two play right there, that had that not happened, who knows what we'd be talking about today.
Mhm.
Probably still a loss, but maybe not the same kind of loss.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think Casey being hurt changes the game into Nebraska winning by any means. I still think Illinois finds a way to win that game because obviously the second half, we said they took their foot off the gas because they knew our offense couldn't run the ball. They might have picked it up more in the second half if Casey was still playing and, kind of keeping it close. But, yeah, I don't think that Nebraska wins that game, whether Casey is healthy the entire rest of the game or not. I still think Illinois won that or wins that game. But you're right. I mean, it changes the conversation of how much better does the offense look versus with Casey versus without Casey. And we kind of had this same thought of last year when Adrian went out for the Michigan State game and then they had to put in, the backups. And it's like, oh man, if, Adrian, it's kind of the same mentality. It's like Casey gives you your best chance to win as Adrian did, despite, Adrian's faults. Like he was still your best option to win football games, just like Casey is still our best option to win football games. So same mentality. And it's just kind of one of those, how much does that go back to recruiting, good quarterbacks that fit your system? Obviously, the quarterbacks that Scott wanted were running quarterbacks, and that's what you get with Logan. And the quarterback that he brought in with Chuba fits Mark Whipple's system. So now you got two quarterbacks with two different systems that you bring in for Mark Whipple and the current offense. And that's just kind of, what we are still seeing, this whole Frost ripple effect of all these recruits were set for Scott's, mentality of how he wants to run his offense. And now you have this brand new, I mean, yeah, they're 8 games in, but you still get those players that are fit for Frost's system and not Whipple's system. And obviously we're seeing that with the quarterback differential right now.
For sure. And what really just boggles my brain, and I don't know if it's a current coaching issue, or if it's an issue going back to the start of the year or even last couple of years, but it's just the development of key players has been abysmal, clearly. And I'm not saying that's a player. I mean, maybe there's something you put on the players there, but I don't know. Like, it just seems like the coaching that we have has just not gotten them to the second level. And it's like you made the comparison kind of to Jalen Hurts and Tua at Alabama, and yeah, you look at them now, and they're both doing, I would say, pretty well in the NFL.
Well, except for the Dolphins trying to kill Tua, but that's a whole different point.
Yeah. Well, they probably they sound like they took a play from Nebraska's playbook for how to run an offensive line, which is not probably the book that they should be reading. But hey, what do I know? But I don't know. It's rough to watch because we have such good talent on the team, and it just doesn't seem like it's ever made it past where they got. This sounds weird, but like they got really far in high school. And they were the star of the show in high school, and then they took half of the next step in order to play at college. But was that enough of a step? And again, does that go on the players or does that go on the coaching? My vote goes to coaching, obviously, especially knowing what we know now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. But unless you guys got any more on the offense to talk about, we can transfer over to defense.
Yeah, I mean, we can, if we want to just debate who we each think of, if we had to go with Chubb or Logan, before we dive into the defense, just since we're on the quarterback point still.
All right. Then for me I would say, it's tough to say because we didn't get much of a look, but I personally think Logan gives us the edge.
Right.
Unless Chubba gets out of his own head, which is what Mickey alluded to in his press conference today, that Chubba just needs to take a breath. But I don't think that's gonna quite cut it, because it's not just breathing that was the problem there, I don't think. But my vote would be Logan. I think he's just the better rounded quarterback.
I would agree too, because I mean, you go back to the Iowa game last year, outside of the whole, what happened with that game. I mean, Logan started out, and I thought Logan played pretty well that game too. And he kind of showed glimpse of, okay, if you're going to keep kind of, a running, passing quarterback, like Logan can develop into that type of system. Now, obviously, everything that happened after that changed everything. But, if Logan just has, I think, more experience against Chubba of running an offense of what he wants to do. And, if that's the part that is kind of the hard part to accept, is Logan's set style does not match what Whipple wants to do. And that's kind of probably obviously why we saw Chubba more, and why, what we had talked about before we hopped on is kind of this kind of clash between Mickey and Whipple of we don't think that they're on the same page of what each one wants to do. Because it was weird to see Logan for, that one possession, and then Chubba the rest of the game when Chubba was not doing well, and we didn't see Logan get put in there at all. So that's something just to kind of monitor is, are those two coaches on the same page or not? Obviously, Scott brought them both in, but one of them didn't bring the other in. So it's not like, they were really good buddies beforehand and came together. They came together because somebody else brought them in, type thing. But I mean, yeah, unless, like we said, Chubba somehow turns it around this week at practice, I still think Logan kind of gives you a better advantage to get the offense to move the ball. Just because you can mix in a lot more different looks with Logan than Chubba. And I guess, Chubba ran a few times on Saturday. He didn't look terrible either. So it's not like he could not run a QB read option. But I think, Logan is the one that Scott had brought in for that reason. So if you're going to run that, then, that's That's just what it is. But I do think Logan should be the starter. We'll see. I'm sure Mickey will either say something Thursday at his final press conference before the game, or we probably won't know until Saturday who the starter is. But at that point, I think it's just I would vote Logan over Chuba. Same with you, Zach. How about you, Nate?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty well in line with you guys. I think at least this week it'd be interesting to see still the mashup of both the quarterbacks. I think give them both a chance at least to run the offense in a full game if Casey is indeed out. But yeah, I think I would still give Smothers a little bit of a nod just because he has the experience, and Chuba just has not shown a whole lot in the reps that he has been in necessarily for in games this year. So I would be more inclined to go with Smothers. He just seems like he's got a better control of the offense. It seems like better chances just to run more run pass option or anything like that. And so I think that's probably the direction I would go. But yeah, we'll see on Saturday, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So
Let's just hope the coaches can put it together and get maybe both of them on a similar page to where maybe we can just see some serviceable QB play. That's all I ask.
I would agree with that.
Serviceable. But
yeah. So we'll lead
that's my take. We can go to defense.
Yeah, we'll lead into the defense here. So start the game out. I mean, same thing with the first quarter. I mean, they looked pretty good. But obviously as the game went on, things did not go well. And Chase Brown showed you why he was and still is the leading back in the nation. He finished with 149 yards and a rushing touchdown, and also that receiving touchdown out of the backfield that he had right before half. So just to show you that he can run against any defense no matter what you put in front of him. We knew that going into the game too. We knew that like if you do not stop Chase Brown and kind of make it, I mean, DeVito also was like what 20 for 22, so he dinked and dunked us like what O'Connell did, but just like 30 fewer passing attempts essentially. I think the longest pass Illinois threw was that, in terms of in the ball being in the air, the longest was that Chase Brown passing touchdown out of the backfield. I don't think they threw anything like in the air longer than like probably 10 yards outside of that touchdown. Everything was just dink and dunk underneath plays, and he just picked us apart. Just kept the offense doing. And I think that's just a staple of how good Illinois knows their system and how well that Belima wants to run it, and it showed. Now, granted, our defense, as we know, not the best either, so it's probably easy to do that. But I mean, first half, I thought they did pretty well. I mean, Garrett had a sack. Isaac Gifford had that free running sack, which was, you love seeing that on defense.
Darn it, you stole what I was just going to say. I was going to be like, you love to see it.
I mean, you do love to see it.
I was so excited when I saw that happen. I was like, oh my gosh, they did the thing.
They did a really good thing. And that usually happens to our offensive line is we don't pick up or see the free roaming blitzing linebacker and get our quarterback killed. So nice to see the defense kind of do that. But I mean, after that, it just kind of went downhill. I mean, Illinois just did what Illinois does, is just, run and pound the clock, just run it at you until you stop them. They're just going to keep doing what they do. And like we had talked about, the score is not indicative how badly that game could have gone if Illinois cared to score more in the second half, because they certainly did not care because they know we couldn't score. So that's just a very sad thought to have about this entire program and this entire team, but it is what it is and we live with it. Only other thought I had was the Reimer late hit out of bounds. I know it really didn't matter that point in the game because your offense wasn't going to score, but Reimer being a veteran guy, like, you got to know. I mean, DeVito was 3 steps out of bounds and he still hit him. And I'm like, oh, they're going to call that 10 out of 10 times. And they did. So just a stupid boneheaded mistake that, you just don't expect out of your veteran guys. Like, obviously Reimer should have known better. But alas, it happened either way. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, defense for the most part didn't do well, obviously, as we know. I mean, in terms of total yards giving up, I mean, 367 total yards doesn't seem like a lot if your offense can also put up that much. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, we knew Illinois was going to run it down our throats. And unless we could stop them, they were just going to keep doing it. And Chase Brown showed you why that he is the best back in the nation. And we'll be very surprised if he's not at least the consideration for a Heisman if he keeps it up. Because, I mean, I'm sure he's averaging well over 100, probably 20 yards a game on the ground, which is astounding. Um, but with that, we'll pass it to Nate. Any thoughts on the defense there?
Nope.
All right. Well,
the defense was
wow.
Yeah, I mean, defense is what it is. Illinois kind of came in. I'm sure they had the game plan of, like you mentioned, just kind of dinking and dunking us like every other team that's beat us has. Run the ball on us like every team that has beat us has. I'm sure they had a pretty deliberate game plan to get ahead as much as they could in that first quarter and just kind of try to rat it out in the second or first half, try to rat it out in the second half. And they certainly did it. They didn't really have too many issues. Like you said, Tommy DeVito was 20 for 22. You can't do that on defense. You gotta get in the way. You gotta block up or break up some passes. Make it difficult for him. I don't know. I don't have too much positive really to spin out of it. They didn't give up that many points, all things considered. Again, that might just be because Illinois took their foot off the gas, but I guess in a sense you can make the case that 2 field goals in the second half isn't too bad. But I don't know. It wasn't a performance that really inspired any confidence in me going forward, I guess. I mean, there were our normal guys. Garrett Nelson was involved. O'Shawn Mathis was involved a little bit. Reimer looks like he was our top tackler, but I don't know. They didn't really. We had what, 2 sacks? I mean,
Yeah, that sounds about right. Because those are the only
We
two plays
had-
that I got excited for.
we had the one turnover, but that wasn't really because anything we did on defense. The guy kind of just lost the ball as it hit him on the thigh, I believe. So we just kind of lucked into that one more than anything. So I don't know. I don't really know where we go from here. It seemed kind of like we were hearkening back to the Scott Frost era on defense, where tackling wasn't necessarily great. It seemed like we weren't necessarily in the good position. I know there were a few times where I said to myself, like, that is a horrible just angle you're taking to try and tackle a guy. And sure enough, they missed it. So I don't know.
Yeah, surprise note, we are not good at tackling still.
Yeah.
Who would have thunk?
Yep. And I mean, I didn't expect a monumental turnaround in a month, but I would have hoped to see at least a little bit of improvement. And it just seems like we really haven't seen that lately, or at least against Illinois, that wasn't necessarily something we saw. And so I don't know. They existed, they were there, they played defense, wasn't great defense. So I guess that's about all I have for my thoughts on the defense. I'll pass it over to you, Zach.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow that up because that pretty much sums it up. But
Oh, you
interestingly
have
enough,
a good point coming up, Zach. You can follow it up with that.
interestingly enough, I was a little higher on the defense compared to what you guys sound like for a while there. They were the closest to being the tale of two halves, which you never want to see with a football team. But at least I thought for a while there the defense was holding their own. We knew Illinois was going to come in and they're going to do what Minnesota's going to do. So we kind of already have a blueprint for what we need to know for Saturday. Obviously, different schemes and whatnot here, but Minnesota's going to do the same thing Illinois did, just without the 17 next to their name. So who knows? Maybe that'll help us. Maybe not playing a ranked opponent will help us. I don't know. But it started off really good. It wasn't perfect. No defense ever is, at least unless you're like Georgia or Tennessee this year, I guess. But even then, like we knew they would score, but there for most of the first half, I was really impressed with how we at least were fighting. And then, once Casey went down, you could just tell it kind of affected the rest of the team in more ways than one, and it just really, really kind of sucked the life out of the team.
Mm-hmm.
Both defensively, offensively, just across the board, you could see it. Which I get it. When you lose one of your big players like that, it's never easy, and all of a sudden adversity becomes tougher. But you really hope that at this point in time that Mickey would be able to spur the guys to do, to at least keep fighting. And I'm not saying they didn't fight, but it just seemed like at that point it was just like all hope was gone essentially, which really sucks. But when it's been kind of beat India for the last 5 years, it's tough to it's tough to really blame them. But
Mm-hmm.
it also makes the product you watch as a Husker fan really tough. So, but outside of that, one of the things I was impressed with, and again, maybe this is just because the refs were being easy on us, but and this isn't necessarily just defensively either, but Nebraska was only called for 3 penalties. And I know obviously one of those was that Reimer one, which was boneheaded, but um, I am just impressed that, we were at least a fairly clean team. But again, if Illinois was running vanilla ice cream for offense and we weren't able to make stops and nothing was really being penalized upon, then I'm not surprised. But yeah, there's not a whole heck of a lot to touch upon with not a whole lot to touch upon with the defense for me. Just really close to that tale of two halves, which I thought was good. I guess I'll spin the positive zone and say they only scored 6 points in the second half. But again, I'm 99% convinced that was because the that Illinois said, you know what, we can go out and play. We can go play basically like when you play Madden or NCAA football on like the Xbox or PlayStation with
Mm-hmm.
your younger sibling, and you're up at like 48 or like 48-7 at half, and you're just playing literally just trick plays and wildcat plays the second half just to give them a chance. Yeah, that's what Illinois did with us. They were like, well, we're going to use the second half as practice and get better at some plays. So, which really sucks because again, and we've touched on this before, it really just shows how far we've fallen. And I'm not even looking, when I say that, I'm not looking for return to 90s. I mean, I'd love to return to the 90s greatness, but I'm just looking for like,
I think we all
hey,
would.
I honestly, I would just like to see a ranking by our name again, even if it is 24 or 25.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Illinois did it,
Mhm.
and no one really expected them to be barn burners this year.
Right.
But here we are. I think if they can do it, I think Nebraska can do it. It's just, we've got a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
with that, I'll pass it back to Andy. We can touch on special teams and start
Well,
transitioning towards everything else.
this takes us into our discussion about the special teams now and the blocked extra point, which also kind of leads into a offensive line discussion because a certain player on the special teams field goal unit, if you've not seen the video, I'm sure you can just Twitter or Google Bryce Benhart, and there will be a video of him on that blocked extra point doing absolutely nothing, which is the reason why the extra point got blocked. And, it just proves that Bryce Benhart might be the worst offensive line player that we have right now. It I had to watch it about 10 times and I kept laughing each time because I'm like, on one hand, I get that you don't want to stand up and like have your kicker kick it into the back of your head, which might be what they plan to do. But at the same time, he didn't make a single effort to stop the Illinois lineman just coming right through and blocking the extra point. And I I'm like so laughy about it now because it's so bad how bad Bryce Benhart is at playing offensive line. Obviously, if the offensive line didn't deserve our weekly Fire into the Sun award, I think Bryce Benhart would take it for this week, just by himself, because it was so bad how bad that play was. But with that, I'll pass it to Nate if he has any thoughts, because I know Zach has a couple thoughts just about the offensive line in general that he wants to discuss.
I don't have too much to say special teams wise. Punting looked this game, and that was about
We
it.
didn't
I'll
have a
go
punt
ahead
blocked. That's
yeah, this is true.
better than the Purdue game.
Little steps here, I guess. But no, that's about all I've got special teams wise. We'll go ahead and get into the spicy takes corner over here.
So the luckiest thing I can say is that if this would have been the day of the game that we recorded this, it would have been me screaming immediately about this. Especially once, well, I think this video came out a little bit after that, but
I've always said that it is very fortunate that we do not record immediately after the game, because what we say now versus what we would say after the game would probably be two completely different things.
And I mean, one of these days we're going to have to try it, just see, but I'm really glad it wasn't this one. And so just because I like to be, I like to be that guy. I definitely went and checked out the video again. I'm watching it on repeat right now on my computer screen, and I keep watching this over and over, and I don't understand, but I feel like this is a perfect example of what Nebraska's become. So obviously, Andy already kind of described it, but on the point after attempt after Nebraska scored the touchdown, a momentum swinging touchdown, by the way, they come out for the point after, and I don't know who it was from Illinois, but he basically just says, "Excuse me, sir," walks through the line and blocks the kick. And had they been paying a little more attention, they could have returned it for 2. I was watching that, and I remember seeing it thinking, how did he get so far in there? Because I didn't see it live. And 2, how do they have so much green space to almost run it back? The video doesn't show that part of it here, but
I remember that after the play, he picked up the ball and everybody kind of looked at each other and like nobody knew if the play was dead or not, and then they started like running, like, oh, this is still a live ball type play.
And it was so interesting because that to me was just such a perfect microcosm, along with the other things that I've said are perfect microcosms, including a onside kick in the third quarter against Northwestern, who has yet to, I think, win a game outside of us, amongst other things. You know, it shows to me that whoever is coaching Nebraska has truly, I'm pretty sure, everything from foundational work up to do. But what really upsets me is that Bryce Benhart was this highly touted recruit. And I looked this up beforehand. He was a 4-star recruit, at least according to 24/7. And this is what we're getting for effort. First of all, that's pathetic. Second of all, Mickey should have taken him out after this, but maybe he didn't see it until afterwards. I don't know. And for anybody that might be a special teams person out there, I did go and look at it a few times just to see if I was crazy. And I see, like, as you said, Andy, already too, you don't want to just stand straight up and have your kicker accidentally hit you. That's the entire purpose of them staying down in their stance. But if you watch the rest of the line, they move. They at least move to a level to where it's like they're trying to get on their block. He didn't move an inch. He moved his arm to the outside. You're supposed to go inside. Like, and I don't know if it's, I don't know. It's whatever, because it's just like, how can you expect any coach to come in here and do anything if that's the effort that they're giving? And if he's already giving up, if he's saying, you know what, this year's done, then bench him or quit. Like, if you don't want to play football anymore, because that's what it looks like. It looks like he doesn't want to play football. And I get it, it's a tough sport. I mean, I don't get it to the level of college because I only played in high school football, but I get that it's a tough sport and it's tough on your body and it probably can be mentally draining, especially playing for a team that hasn't won for years now. But, like, come on, at least put in some effort. And this kind of coincides because Sports Illustrated put out a really interesting article about Mickey Joseph and kind of his, time, his long interview process And if you haven't read it, I recommend reading it. I think what I'll do is I might link it on our socials just as reading material for people that want to read it if they haven't. But
Ross Jellinger is the journalist who wrote that article, and he did a really good job of kind of diving into the background of Mickey, because Ross had spent time in Louisiana when Mickey was still in Louisiana coaching. So he kind of already knew about Mickey's background and everything, but it's a really good deep dive into just Mickey in general and then kind of his time here now still.
And for context, oh, sorry, Nate, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this podcast is not sponsored by Sports Illustrated yet.
Correct, yet.
Soon.
If
Ross,
you're out there listening, we might take some offers.
We're listening.
yeah, we hear. We'll hear you. But it was so funny because this came out, I think, 2 days after. So it came out, was it yesterday? I think it was Monday.
Yes, and the funny part about this is this story was supposed to drop Friday, too. So after reading it, and I kind of sat back and I'm like, this would have hit 100% different if this happened before Saturday and how I felt before the game versus how I felt after the game. So reading it kind of after the loss of Saturday, and it's just like the story hits a lot different than it probably would have before the game.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And again, it's still a good read, regardless of when you read it. Obviously, it's after the game now. But one of the things I scratched my brain trying to figure out how exactly I felt, because on one hand, I was like, the Illinois game showed me that Mickey may not be ready. But then I read this and I was like, it really just reinforced, because I've been on the Mickey Kool-Aid train this whole time. Like after we won against Indiana and Rutgers, and I thought, hey, we see a different team. I thought like he might be the guy at minimum, at least to be a player's coach. And I feel like that's what we needed in terms of just being able to connect with the kids that play the game. Because at the end of the day, the coach can coach as much as he wants. And this kind of gets into my long point here, but he can coach as much as he wants, but if the players don't put in the effort, then is it really his fault? And I say that for anybody that is going to get the head coaching position. But this article just kind of reinforced to me that Mickey has the stuff, like he's got the correct mindset, that if we were to give him the head coaching job, I think he'd have absolutely everything there in terms of the mental fortitude, and he would just be perfect at the being the head of the team. Would he be able to do it in terms of being the CEO role, which has now kind of become the head coaching role in football, and putting those good coaches in there to do the actual coaching of the positions when he can't do it? I mean, we know he's really good with wide receivers, but you would think if he becomes a head coach that he would want to, maybe not, but you would think he'd want to take a step back and kind of let his guys, let his coaches do the bulk of that. And then, he just oversees the team. That's what I want in the next head coach. Does he have that? Can he be the CEO of the team? I don't know. I don't know. That's going to be the tricky part that needs to be answered by Trev. Thankfully, not us. But again, on the flip side of that argument, if you have people like Bryce Benhart that are going out there on a point after attempt and are putting in what looks like zero effort, and for something and I put this in quotes, small as a point after attempt, it's not any smaller than any other play in the game, but it's something that most people look at. It's like, okay, well, they're going to go, that's where you go get your beer. That's where you go get you go to the bathroom. Like, most people don't really stick around during the point afters if they need to go do something. They use that time because they're probably going to go into a commercial break on TV after that, whatever, so small quotes. But how can you expect any coach to come into the building and get them to coach any player up if that's the kind of effort they're going to get? Granted, I still think, Mickey should have definitely benched him afterwards, but the work had already been done. The kick was blocked. It didn't matter then. And it was almost returned for 2. At least it looked like it could be. But I don't know. I wrote that up after I watched the game again, and I was like, I think Mickey should get the head coaching job? Truthfully, I don't know. It's all going to be a gamble, whoever comes in here, because it could be, it could even be someone like Urban Meyer or Nick Saban. But I think there's so much work that needs to be done, regardless of who comes in here, that we're not going to see immediate success. And I think once people figure that out, then the head coaching job will be a little easier to manage.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when you see plays like this and you just, you're taught if you're going to be a competitor at any level, they tell you to go until the clock says 0, till the final minute runs out. That's not what I saw. And again, do I think Mickey's to blame for that? No, but he should have been benched after that. But anyway, that's my piece on it. So I will leave that as it is.
It's a good discussion point. I mean, definitely watching that game Saturday, I had the same thoughts of, if this is how this is gonna be, like, Mickey maybe is not the guy. It's also one of those things you have to look at it. I mean, it's so multifactorial of, you have, like, obviously Mickey was handed a plate of crap. I mean, this is what he was given. So you can't really fault him at all. I mean, you can't fault him because his coaches that he has assistants around him were not brought in by him either. The players that are here, he has not recruited them here either. So you have to look at it at that point, But he's now what, 5 games into his interim role here, and this game kind of reminded me of, this is one of those Scott Frost games. I mean, this is like a perfect example of what I would see out of a Scott Frost team. And this is what this reminded me of like, just, just that stupid play that, or just overall play in general that we would see out of a Scott Frost led team. And I think, if you hire Mickey, I mean, you can't make it based off emotion. I mean, this cannot be an emotional based hire. If that's all you care about is, oh, I want Mickey to stay because I think, he gets the guys going and he's good culture, yeah, that's only going to get you so far. I mean, Saturday proved that you can have the right mentality, you can have the right culture, but if you do not have the right coaches that are going to develop your guys, if you do not have the right players in your system, you are just going to get thrashed, and we did. That's why I've said from the start, I mean, you need to get a coach that is going to build around the line. I mean, Belima is like the perfect example of that. Illinois has now, what, 8-1, or did they move to 7-1? One of the two.
7-1, I believe.
7-1. I mean, that line pushed us around. They have, like, I'd have to look up what Chase Brown was recruited wise, but I mean, you look at, Belima's in year 2, and he was handed all of this stuff as well, and he's already turned it around. Obviously, Belima's a far better coach than Frost was in terms of experience, but not saying that it can't be done with, you're handed these players. I mean, Belima he didn't recruit Trace Brown. He didn't recruit any of these, offensive line, defensive line type players, yet he's able to turn them around to a nationally ranked team in year 2. So it's baffling to see that, like, coaching staffs make a difference, and that hiring somebody that is going to build around a solid line, you can put talent around a line. But if you have a talent, like I've said before, if you just have your talent backs and no line like we have now, you're not going to get anywhere, especially in the Big Ten. So it's one of those things that, like, you gamble with that with Mickey. You have no idea who he's like, if he gets hired, who he's going to keep on the current staff, who he's even going to bring in, type people. Like, obviously we know he's a great recruiter. He has proven that he is such a great recruiter, but can he recruit for what we are in the Big Ten and what the type of program that we are? Like, we are not a flashy LSU type talent team where you can run and gun in the SEC and build around that. Like, the Big Ten is a smash mouth type league, and that's just what you have to build around in the Midwest and what you have to build around in the Big Ten. So I'm kind of with you, Zach. Like, I'm starting to lean off the Mickey train. I'm still waiting until the end of the season to kind of, formally make my decision. But I also think at the same time, it's kind of odd that we haven't heard anything in terms of rumors that have really sparked or Trev saying anything at all. I expected Trev to say nothing, but it's kind of weird that like we haven't heard anything at all. And that's kind of what we talked about last week. Like if you don't hear anything up until the Iowa week, like you kind of assume Mickey's probably going to get the job. So it's such a gamble for the program to just hire somebody that's not proven, that can't come in and, like you said, Zach, like it's going to, like we knew it was going to take years for the frost ripple effect to finally get out of the program. Like we know that. And I know Trev knows that with whoever he hires. Like, yeah, it's probably going to be a rough couple of years, but like we need to get you in here to develop these coaches, develop these players, and build what Nebraska wants to be and compete for, Big Ten championships and national championships again. And I just right now, I mean, Saturday, obviously I went in kind of with the optimism of the Mickey train, but it just Saturday proved that like you need somebody that is going to develop players and build around the line, because obviously in year two, Belima has already done that with the current players that he did not recruit in. He did not bring in these players, and yet he's able to turn that around to do what he's done at Illinois. So that's
And
kind of
for the
my 2
record,
cents on it. Yeah.
and for the record, for me, I still I still think Mickey would be a good option. I still think he's top 5. Yes, he's unproven, but sometimes maybe, like when you learn how to swim, you get thrown in the deep end and you
Right.
figure it out by paddling your butt off. But I mean, I don't know. I'm with what you're saying there for sure. It's still just it's hard for me to be like, you can get anybody you want, but if you're going to get that kind of effort from your players, it doesn't matter who you get in here, you're not going to have success. But
right, and that's what I'm hoping for. And it's tough to obviously convince this fan base of like, you cannot hire Mickey solely based off of, oh, you like the guy because he brings, that mentality and that emotion to the players. I'm like, yeah, that's cool and all, but if you can't do what you actually need to do in football games, like it does not matter. So that's obviously the tough part about trying to sway and convince Husker Nation that they just cannot make this hire based off of emotion. And that's what I've said all along. It's like, yeah, it's gonna really suck if we keep winning, because it's like you have no choice but to keep Mickey, and then you might be at this again in like 3 to 4 years again. So with that, Nate, I'll pass it to you if you have any quick thoughts about that before we dive into Minnesota here.
Not too much. Going to be a tough coaching search still. You guys brought up some really good points. I think we still got a few more games. We'll find out in a few more games, and I think it's still a long interview process for Mickey. So I'm not definitely not off the train for him yet. But I think he can recruit well. He's done that. He's proven that he can recruit guys, big time players, even to Nebraska. It seems like he can really get players buy into what his vision is for the program and what he wants to see on the field. I think there's still some probably culture changes that are ongoing, as we can see with players like Ben Hart and some of those guys that aren't necessarily trying as hard. And that's just something that is probably going to have to be built over, rather than something that's just shoved to the side. It's something you got to work out of the program. And we were hoping it was being done with the Frost era, but unfortunately, it was probably made arguably worse
Arguably,
than what Mike Riley left us. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration too. With Mickey, is like he is inheriting a really, really, really bad program, and not necessarily top of the line players. I mean, he had a hand in getting some of the transfer guys here, but that's
I was gonna
about
say
it.
that's like the biggest thing too, is like all of the players that are doing well are transfer players. They are not recruits that Frost brought in at all. Outside
Yep.
of like obviously Garrett Nelson, or I guess any of the defensive players. Offensive wise, I mean, the offense is good because you have Casey, Trey, and Anthony Grant, who were all transfer players.
Yep.
And Marcus Washington. at times. But like we discussed before, you can't, like, the transfer portal is a quick fix type solution. It is not something you can build a long-term team off of as well. But yeah, if you have any other points, we'll kind of dive right into Minnesota here. So Saturday, right now they are a plus 16 dog at home, which I think is third highest all time that Nebraska has ever been an underdog at home. I think the other two times were 2017 Ohio State and 2019 Ohio State, which obviously those were well warranted as well. But either way, Nebraska goes into that game needing just some sort of momentum, and we're kind of going to see the same thing out of Minnesota as we saw at Illinois, a team that is very run heavy with Mo Ibrahim, who is another, he's almost eclipsed 1,000 yards. So he's definitely a top leading rusher in the country again. I know I made a note there that I want Tanner Morgan to graduate. I am so sick and tired of playing him, just like Sean Clifford. He just needs to graduate and please get away from football because I am so tired of playing him. But at the same time, these offenses are like semi-identical. They're going to dink and dunk you underneath. Tanner Morgan probably has a better arm at throwing long balls, so we might see a little bit more of that. But we definitely know Minnesota's identity is running the ball. They average about 223 rushing yards a game, which is top 15 in the country. They're 105th in passing yards a game in the country. So, definitely not a passing threat team. But again, what we said all year, any team that plays Nebraska looks like a championship caliber team as well. So, offensive wise, we're going to see probably a similar style as we saw with the Illinois game. So on the defensive front, how do you approach that in terms of trying to fix your defense to stop Mo? Because I'm sure Minnesota is going to do what Illinois did. It's just give Mo 25 plus carries and like, hey, just hit your holes, do what you got to do, follow your line, and just gash the defense. So hopefully the defense kind of learned of facing a top back. Hopefully they can adjust to that. Likewise, Minnesota's defense, probably about the same as Illinois' defense. I know going forward, I looked up these stats. We are going to be playing the top at least 7 defenses going forward the rest of the year outside of Wisconsin. I think Minnesota's like number 3. Iowa's, I think, number 5 in the country in total defense. So it does not get any easier from here on out for our offense going against subpar defenses, because Minnesota is about the same as Illinois. They do not give up a lot of points. They do not give up a lot of yards, either passing or running. So that makes me very nervous on who we have as quarterback, because we're going to need a spectacular game. And I do not think we have even remotely close to a spectacular backup quarterback, as we've mentioned before. So like, both sides of the ball, we're probably going to see a very similar game plan of offense and defense from Minnesota. Not much to differentiate besides the two. So I think my keys to the game are going to be as they were last week. You're definitely going to need your defense to make turnovers and make a couple big plays, and you're definitely going to need your special teams to make a couple big plays. Because if Casey is still out and we have to rely on Chuba and Logan, we are definitely going to be relying on the other two facets of the game to probably keep us in the game and get us some points. Because I just don't see our offense moving unless we mix it up really well between Chuba and Logan. I don't see our offense moving the ball that well against Minnesota. So I'll pass it to Nate and Zach over there for their quick initial thoughts before we get some predictions in here.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be one of those games where they kind of run us into the ground, and when they stop doing that, they're going to pass over us.
Yep. Tanner Morgan is a much better quarterback than Danny DeVito. So
Tommy DeVito. I wish it was Danny DeVito.
It is Tommy DeVito. You're right.
I wouldn't make a very good quarterback. He's kind of short. Just gonna throw that out there.
Oh my god, I can't believe I did that. But I digress. Continue, Nate.
But I think, just looking at Minnesota, they're a little more run heavy, but overall fairly balanced, averaging about 200 passing yards, 220 rushing yards per game. So I think it'll be a pretty balanced attack from them. They've got the experience. They're going to be another team that has a lot of experience on both sides of the ball. A lot of, I think, super seniors again. They got Mo Ibrahim, another one on the top running backs in the nation. Tanner Morgan has been there for 30 years. Might be there for another 30. We'll see.
Understatement on the 30 years.
But I think it's going to be, like you said, really similar to the Illinois game, and that does not bode well for us. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Zach for any of his thoughts quick before we get into predictions.
It's going to be another ugly Big Ten game, and we know how these go, but unfortunately, one of the teams in that Big Ten game is Nebraska. So that means that Minnesota is probably going to be really able to run all over us, especially with Mr. Mo Ibrahim in there. I mean, I don't know. Minnesota and Nebraska have always played well against each other, but I think this is going to be one of the years where we see that Minnesota plays better by far than Nebraska. I guess for me, the keys to the game are going to be trying to stop the run and just seeing if we can, well, maybe not stop it, but try to slow it down some, maybe try to hold them back, make them pass. If they're going to beat us in the air, then fine. They're obviously not as strong there. So if we can make them pass it, I think we'll have success on the defense. And for the offense, it's just go out there and I'd say do your job. Like the offense itself,
do the football kind of good.
do the good thing, do the needful. I don't think it needs to be overly tough. I mean, I'm not saying run the simplest playbook we got, but definitely I say maybe try to slow like we did with the first couple games that Mickey won there. Slow it down a little bit and maybe just give Chuba or give Logan or both of them. Try to give them some time to breathe and let that offensive line maybe they'll find a spark too, especially with I don't know if we'd mentioned this already with Jalen Weaver moving to offensive line from D line.
Oh yeah,
which was his decision, which I don't know. I mean, that going back to the rant that I did just have, maybe the players are taking it upon themselves to make the team better, rather than having, because another thing that also I was watching before we started here that I think is key to the game is Brewington even came out during his press conference today, and he had said that Coach Mick will come out and say it's on him, but at the end of the day, we as players need to execute and we need to do the things too. And then he went with an example where he should have done this instead of this. And so, the accountability I think is there. And I think our players really want to play for Coach Mick, but this would be a great game to put it together because I'd love to see us beat Minnesota. And so, slow down the run. Let's maybe try blocking on special teams a little bit here and there.
What?
And
no way.
and maybe just keep the offense simple, but do what works. And hopefully maybe get some better play calling because I know I put on our notes here that we were discussing is this week. What do we put? Is it the offensive line or do we put Mark Whipple and his questionable play calling? And I'll admit we can put both of them into a rocket and see what happens because I'm convinced they both probably need to go that way, at least after last week, but maybe they can fix it. So that's all I got. I mean, I think it should be it'll be an interesting game, I think. So
right. So prediction wise, I will go 31-14 Minnesota. I do think we'll get a couple touchdowns. I think Nebraska scores kind of late in the game as their second touchdown. As kind of Minnesota either puts in their second team or just kind of takes their foot off the gas because they'll do what Illinois did and just kind of let us coast and do whatever we want because we know we can't win. And I don't think it's going to be a very high scoring affair just because Minnesota does run the ball a lot. So unless we give up 80 plus yard touchdowns every other play, think it's going to be kind of a semi-low scoring game. But yeah, 31-14 Minnesota.
I think I want to go and see. I'm looking at weather right now. There's actually a chance for some rain, possibly some snow mixing in on Saturday morning, kind of Saturday throughout the day, which could
Don't like
introduce a
that.
whole new set of complications to that game. But still a lot of variability and uncertainty at this time range. But there's at least some signals, so be something to look forward to, I guess, moving closer to the game. But I'm gonna go with 24-12. I think we're gonna score some field goals. I think that's about as far as we're gonna get.
Just a lot of field goals.
Yep.
Mine, I think, is really close as well. I don't know. I think Minnesota is going to have kind of the same realization. If they do like they did, if Illinois did like they did to us, Minnesota will probably just take it easy. That's we hope we'll take it easy that second half. For me though, I actually am going to say we're going to get one touchdown and then field goals after that because that's the Nebraska special, baby. And I'm going to say we're going to get 13 points to their 28. I think.
Don't you
They're
mean the
gonna.
Denver Broncos special?
Oh.
Are they are all the players reading from the same book when it comes to those teams? Because
It's a bad book that they should not.
I was
be
going to
reading
say
from.
these books that I keep bringing up, like I think they're reading from this book. Those need to be thrown away, obviously, because they shouldn't be doing that. But hey, again, like I always say, I don't coach, so what do I know?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
it for
so
me, though.
yeah, with that, kind of one quick final point I wanted to bring up, just in terms of the college football world, that the college football playoff rankings got released today. So just your kind of top 10 as we go here in order. You have Tennessee at 1, Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, and Clemson at 4. So if the playoff were to be today, that would be your top 4 teams in. And then just your teams kind of on the outside looking in at the moment. Michigan at 5, Alabama at 6, TCU at 7, Oregon at 8, USC at 9, and LSU at 10. So be interesting to see those rankings fluctuate as the season goes on. I know we talked about last week that those will obviously change when Tennessee and Georgia play and Ohio State, Michigan play. So that'll kind of be a fluid, fluctuating situation as we go on. So if you guys have any other points here, we'll kind of wrap it up. Or if you have any just a quick initial thoughts about the rankings.
Yeah, I think my biggest thought was that I was surprised LSU made it into the top 10. I mean, they're
Right.
6-2 ahead of Ole Miss, UCLA, Illinois. I mean, that one really surprised me. I truthfully didn't even
I
know
mean,
LSU was really ranked.
they
So
should
good on
be
them.
ranked
But
above Ole Miss because they beat Ole Miss, but like ranked
Mhm.
10 is, you're right. That's a little interesting.
Yeah, that was kind of the main shocker to me. And then Rocky Top. But
Go Rocky Top.
It's especially interesting that LSU is on there because I'm just looking at the records here. They are the top 10 and they have a 6-2 record. And I mean, they've obviously turned it around a little bit, but the next 6-2 team on that list is Kansas State down at 13. So,
yep,
and they've been balling out too, but they don't have
that
Adrian
was it.
currently. He's injured, but
Didn't need him last week. 48-0
They
against Oklahoma State.
thrashed Oklahoma State, and I think thrashed is like an understatement. That was
Yep,
48-0 that they beat Kansas or Oklahoma State.
48-0.
Yeah, that was very, very surprising. Out of all the college football scores, that was the most surprising to me because they got just hammered by Kansas State.
to me though, I'm so pumped to see Tennessee number 1 just because if nothing else, it's different. And it's finally
Right.
not your Alabamas and your Georgias. And I agree with Tennessee being put at number 1. As soon as that came out while we were on here, I was super excited because I'm like, that's what I've thought this whole time is Tennessee should for sure be in conversation, at least top 2. Um, you know, do I think they have an edge over Georgia? I mean, we're going to find out, but I really, really will like to see Clemson over Michigan was kind of a surprise to me, but I think, I think the writing is kind of on the wall. If you ask me, I think Ohio State is going to give Michigan its what for. So I think I don't necessarily think the playoff committee said that out loud when they were talking about it, but I think it might have been they might have thought about it.
Right.
But it's just nice to see something different. And what's really going to be fun is when the playoff finally changes and we get to see these top 12 teams that are.
Oh yeah.
Is that right? It's 12 team. That'll
Yes,
be way more exciting.
I mean, yeah.
That to me is going to open up the playoff entirely.
Which then, yeah, you would just include Ole Miss and UCLA at that point to finish out your top 12. So that, I mean, yeah, and then at the outsiders at that point would be Kansas State, Utah, Penn State, and Illinois if it were today. So, I mean, you get a little bit more of those 1-2 loss teams kind of in the mix there, kind of trying to get into a 12-team playoff. So I agree. We just need to get to that now, but college football playoff likes to drag its feet.
Well, and with how these records are too, outside of the 8-0s at the top, well, so unless you're TCU at number 7, but like with these are, like you said, fluid, and so this could, I would just love to see the top 4 just get completely switched up with completely different teams. Like let's keep Tennessee there, but let's see let's see what TCU looks like in a top 4 in the playoff, or even like the 5 and 6 spot. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm super pumped.
Right. So gonna be fun to watch that go. So in terms of this weekend, obviously 11 a.m. kickoff, ESPN2 against Minnesota. It's going to be a football game. Whether it's good or bad, there will be football, at least for one team in particular.
It'll be one of the football games of all time, that's for sure.
It's going to be a football game. So as we'll just wrap it up here. Obviously, always go Big Red, but not leaning too much into the optimism tank of a good outlook for Saturday. But nonetheless, we'll go out, we'll play football. Mickey, obviously his job interview. This is still a job interview game for him, so we'll see how that goes. But just as a reminder, you can always find us on our social medias on Facebook and Twitter there. Always give us details to talk about. If you guys have any other thoughts or questions, you can always shoot them at our socials and we'll get them discussed on the show here. But I'm Andy, that is Nate, and that is Zach. And as always, remember, if it's a possibility, it is a Nebraskability.